I'm Leslie Elliott Boyce, and this is The Radical Center, a recording project I began in 2022 as a way to describe and discuss the social and ideological currents that are rapidly altering our culture. In a time when political polarization seems to be the norm, I'm seeking to understand rather than react. I'm grateful to all the thoughtful men and women who share their stories and insights with me in this conversation series. If you would like to contribute to this project financially, there are links in the description. Thank you, and thank you all for listening and being part of this exploration. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Jamie Roberts again. And Jamie, you're an Australian academic, sort of a displaced academic, I would say, perhaps.
Yeah. I went on leave a few months ago, and I haven't yet gone back, and so I'm trying to figure out I'm trying to figure out what I want to do, how I feel about the university.
Mm-hmm.
I think we talked a bit before. It does feel a bit like going back to an abusive relationship, as you talked about with one of your earlier guests. And so it's funny, like the older I get, the more I feel like I just can't compromise. And even for me, holding my tongue is like compromising.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, everyone says, sure, you've got to pick your battles, maybe you do better in the system than out of the system. But, every time you hold your tongue, even then it feels like I'm, betraying something. And then a lot of the time I don't hold my tongue. Mm-hmm. And then when you do that, sooner or later you get pushback. And so it's just it's pretty complicated. Although we're all familiar with the experience, I suppose, but it's strange because I do feel like I really ought to be able to just stand against it. You have that kind of stoic sense. Whenever you read like Aurelius or Epictetus or whatever, and they always say dumbass things like, "Oh, you're getting executed after lunch. Well, enjoy your breakfast." And like I like the Stoics, but I don't know. I just don't know if I really believe them. I don't know, given how much we're such social creatures, and especially if you're in the truth game, you've got to be kind of open, which means you then become vulnerable to what other people think. And so, this sounds all pretty snowflakey, but maybe that's also just the way it is.
I don't think it sounds snowflakey. I think it's a problem a lot of people can really relate to. I mean, a lot of people are finding themselves in some version of the same dilemma. And it's really difficult because you have a set of life goals that now something you weren't anticipating has kind of inserted itself in between you and the career or the path that you've been on. You have to reevaluate. I think that it's a serious conundrum for a lot of people. And if people who are listening right now are not already familiar with the details of your story, I would encourage people to go back and listen to the longer form interview you and I did a couple months back. So there are two previous conversations that we've had on this channel. One in which you went through some Lewis Carroll poetry, and it was really cool. It was this, I think I titled it like an anti-woke Lewis Carroll or something like that. But it was it was great how you were pulling out themes from his literature that are enduring and speak to issues that we're dealing with today. And I know we're going to speak about Philip Larkin today, so I'm excited for that. But do you want to give just a little, in a nutshell, the version of your story for anybody who hasn't caught up?
Yeah, sure. Back in the early 2000s, when I first started thinking for myself, I wanted to write about, I guess we call it gender issues these days, and relationships. And, I'd kind of looked into my soul or my heart or whatever, and didn't like exactly what I found there, and thought, wow, I can really see what's going on here with the whole man-woman thing. And, I feel like there's a lot to be said, a lot to contribute. I studied feminism. There's different branches of it. And anyway, tried to write about what I thought was particularly interesting and useful, and kind of got my first serious pushback, my first sort of major encounter with identity politics. And I've really pushed on ever since. I did a PhD still, but I've kind of been on the fringes of academia for some time, struggling. It just became more and more apparent that there were just basically anything that we ought to talk about, we couldn't talk about. Anything that I thought was genuinely valuable, whether it be man and woman stuff or career stuff or truth stuff, or, the value of the classics, the nature of the West, any of that stuff, it was almost impossible to talk about it for various, reasons. You get pushback, you get silence, you get, any stuff like that. Anyway, it's gone on and on. I eventually ended up with a tenured position at Sydney University in 2020. And nothing's really changed. It's just the same, which is kind of funny, kind of sad. Yeah, like nothing's really changed in 20, 25 years. It's almost the identical problems, the identical silences, different cast of characters, but always the same trouble. And so after a while, it's challenging. You feel like you're the insane one,
Mm-hmm.
Like you just constantly feel like I'm the insane one and the evil one. And who knows, maybe I am. But anyway, I wrote a book. The whole intellectual dark web phenomenon kicked off, in the whole podcast and YouTube world sometime around 2015, 2014, with Joe Rogan, and then Jordan Peterson appeared, and then Eric Weinstein turned up, and Sam Harris, who'd been cooking along for a while, was sort of joined in. And, and so then suddenly there were all these people who were talking about the stuff that you weren't allowed to talk about in the academy. And it was like, wow, this is, and for a decade or two, I'm like, oh, I'm the crazy one. And then it's like we've seen exactly the same thing, which was really amazing. So it's like, oh, hey, maybe I'm onto something. I don't know. And so, I eventually wrote a book, The Way of the Intellectual Dark Web. Why not? This is great. Something I can really put my heart into. And it came out earlier this year. And then within 2 weeks, it was pulled from publication. And following complaints, although I never found out what the complaints were, turned out it wasn't sufficiently scholarly. I'd then have to go through a whole lot of revisions. It's one of those sort of gray area experiences. But the publisher agreed to release me from the contract, which was great. And I've since found another publisher, Pitchstone Books, which they published Helen Procrose and James Lindsay's Cynical Theories, which is like a brilliant book about all of these issues. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know when it'll be out again, hopefully just a few months, but that's pretty exciting. And so talking to people like you, started my own YouTube channel, starting to get into the double digits with views.
What's the name of your YouTube channel?
Oh, it's just my name, Jamie Q. Roberts. But you got to start somewhere. So my aim is just to start putting up content, just the stuff I'm passionate about. I mean, whether things happen or not, I don't know, but you can't expect too much. But I don't know. That wasn't quite a nutshell. That was like I don't know, like
that's that's a nutshell, I'd say. Yeah, that's about as good as somebody asked
something
me
like that
about my story about university the other day, and I felt like, oh gosh, are you ready for this waterfall? Because I don't know where to start.
I could talk for a decade. Yeah. Sorry.
No, I like that you said anything we ought to talk about, we couldn't, and I think that's that rings really true to me. And it seems like there's this avant-garde that sort of happens, and maybe academia at one point was this like place where you could really engage with ideas and really have these conversations of frightening nuance and talk about things that were conceptual and daring and fascinating. But at some point it seems to have calcified and it's become safe. And to be safe, you have to be inoffensive. You have to be sterilized. And in that process, you're losing what makes it really important and what makes it relatable and human. So that's an interesting, I think that's just a really good encapsulation. Anything we ought to talk about, we couldn't. And it feels like that right now.
Yeah, yeah, and it, I mean, it has the effect of radicalizing as well. Like, I really try to stay on an even keel, you know. I really try to keep weighing things, but you know, and I've spent almost all of my adult life on the left, and yeah, I don't think I'm exactly there at all anymore. But yeah, but it's just hard not to get radicalized, and I mean, God, I don't know how radicalized I'd actually get, but you know, it's, you know, because we're all still tribal. Like, you know, I'm still tribal. I just try not to be. And so, you know, and so, yeah, the more that stuff goes on in the unis, yeah, and the more you just get, yeah, I mean, even the more balanced people who would have interesting things to say probably get a bit broken by it all. I don't know if that's for better or worse. Maybe it's good if we, I think John Cleese at one point, they were saying, you know, how do you make a comedian? And he says, yeah, that's why I love him. It's like, yeah, a lot of anger. I can't remember if I've said this before, but say, yeah, you got to be angry, a lot of anger. Something, you know, I don't know, maybe that's a good thing, you know?
Huh. Huh.
So,
yeah,
yeah,
I guess so. I guess so. That's really interesting. So I'm glad to hear that the book has been picked up by another publisher. I look forward to an update saying it's out. That'd be great.
It's actually a great outcome because the one before was an academic publisher and this is a trade publisher. So it's actually going to, you know, be on sale for $20. So, you know,
oh yeah, instead of like 120 or whatever.
Yeah, something horrific, you know, it was $70 or something. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
wonderful. Well, you proposed today to walk us through some Philip Larkin, and I'm intrigued and interested. I'm actually not sure if I am familiar with Larkin. I know his name, and maybe, you know, if you start reading some things, I might remember them from college literature courses, but off the top of my head, I'm not sure. So,
okay.
Yeah, I'm interested in what you've got in store.
Should I share the screen, get rolling?
Sure, that'd be great.
All right. The dreaded Zoom share.
Yep.
Done it so many times and yet still. All right. Can you see that all right?
I can see it great.
Okay, so Philip Larkin. Yeah, I don't quite have a thesis in the same way that I did with the Lewis Carroll one. But yeah, the poetry of Philip Larkin is yeah, so moving to me and so relevant and so simple and so deep that yeah, I just wanted to pick out a few of I mean, he's one of those interesting poets, very, very few poets, very, very few artists where almost all of his poems are good. And I don't really say that about anyone much. I almost feel it's a bit like that, you know, with the band The Smiths, or like maybe the Pixies. I mean, okay, sure, they do have a few bad songs, but there's like a couple of bands, or I don't know, maybe Aphex Twin, where they almost don't have bad songs. Whereas with everyone else,
yeah,
with like almost every other poet or musician or whatever that I like, you know, I could take or leave most of what they do. So I find it's pretty amazing with Larkin. So here's a British poet, 1922 to 1985. I guess they call him a post-war poet. He's a sort of a sad guy. I think in his 20s, he wrote, I think, a couple of books about relationships. And for him, he was never able to make a relationship work. And so he walked a sort of a knife edge between, I think, recognizing quite honestly the dark side of masculinity and wanting, I think, in a sense, to not be that guy, but not to be able to make it work as a good guy. If I get around to it, the final poem, Letter to a Friend About Girls, touches on this a bit. It's unbelievably powerful and dark, and but yeah, and I never knew his politics when I first got into him in high school, but turns out he's a conservative, which is interesting. Um, maybe that's why he doesn't get mentioned so much at university, because once you're a conservative, you've got nothing to say. But I thought that was interesting as I've kind of got older and reflected more on his politics.
That is interesting.
But but I don't know. I'll roll on anyway to this quotation. This is just, I think one of his collected works was published in 2012. There's been another one out recently, which I've been trying to get my hands on. And I can't seem to get it at the moment, but there's another version which is really terrific. I've seen it. But I thought I'd just talk a little bit about, again, why Larkin? And maybe we could also have a bit of a brief chat about what we were also talking about last time and the time before. Like what's going on with literature? What's going on with art? Why is it so compelling? Why are we studying it? I digress, but I'm about to do an article on this for a Australian magazine, Quadrant. I was talking to the editor, and tossing this idea around, which I realize is one of the most enduring mysteries that I'm trying to get my head around about, why do we find poetry so compelling? The process by which the artist puts their ideas into a poem, and then we then have to analyze it and extract it, present it as propositions. Like, why is this the process we go through? Anyway, I'll say a bit more about that in a second. Maybe we can talk a bit more about that, but it's kind of deep to me. Anyway, this is just some remarks about Larkin. As the years go by, it's becoming steadily clearer that Larkin is the post-war British poet who matters most on every level, from his influence on other poets to his permanent, ready presence in the minds of all his readers. This is the bit where it starts to get interesting. For he is, as Martin Amis said, borrowing a term from Nabokov, not just memorable, but mnemogenic. I'd never heard that word before.
I don't know that word. Yeah.
I'd never heard it before I was looking over these remarks. And it's a really cool word. It means that something goes into your brain and you remember it without even trying to. Obviously in the way songs do, songs get into your head. So that's interesting. But it's particularly interesting when poems get into your head, because, God knows poems are often obscure and boring. Let's be honest. So when you actually come across poems that want to be remembered, what's going on? Something serious is going on. There is no need deliberately to commit Larkin's poems to memory. There you go. There's the definition. They enter into your very being of their own accord. Very bold statement. Again and again, his readers find that what they themselves feel about what happens in their own life is best apprehended, understood, and expressed through Larkin's words and cadences coming to mind unbidden. So we live our lives, we have our experiences, we're trying to reflect on whatever the hell's going on in this crazy existence thing, and we think of Larkin without meaning to. It's pretty bold, but that's the story of my life. I think about what happens to me, and time and again, Larkin's poems come into my head. And so that just says to me that we need to talk about them more. They're striking at something pretty deep. If collectively so many humans have the same experience with this guy, with this poem, with his poetry.
I think of T.S. Eliot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like Wasteland, or
the Hollow Men.
Hollow Men. Yeah.
Proof Rock especially, I think.
Yeah. So there's something extremely powerful in that process, which is why we teach literature, because people, I suppose wise people or whatever, they have a sense of this process and this value, but it's hard to put your finger on it, which is in a sense also why the whole, postmodern machine, which consumes and destroys everything. Perhaps why it also comes for literature, because it's very difficult to explain and justify this process to say why something's a classic, and you sort of end up saying, well, it's because everyone thinks it is. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, but that's the very argument of consensus that we're so often pushing back against, So yeah, these are deep points. But yeah, I often think, so why do I like Larkin? Well, I like it because he seems to really put his finger on what's going on in my life and the world. And then I think, isn't it enough that poets could just, write out in prose, this is what I think, this is what I think about the world, but you can't do it. I mean, you can, like it's called Twitter, you just tweet stuff and then it goes out. But there's something like, no matter how right you are, there's a certain, I don't know, it's too easy. It's impermanent. So it's like, here's my little 4-step process. The artist apprehends the world in the way we all do. The artist embeds his or her thoughts in art. And then that's when this sort of strange process where your ideas about what's the true and the good, they have to get mashed together with the beautiful. And now the true makes a lot of sense to me. It's the nature of reality. The good makes a lot of sense to me. It's what we ought to do given the nature of reality. It's hard to work out what's true. It's hard to work out what's, what we ought to do, but conceptually they make sense. The beautiful is still mysterious to me, no matter how much I think about it. But somehow there's this process of merging the true and the good with the beautiful. That's what the artist does. Then you wait. Time passes. And then if the world endures the test of time, as that previous remark seems to indicate from Larkin, somehow people just keep thinking of the damn guy. And you're just like, yeah. And so then people come along and then they then decode it, try to extract the true and the good from it. And then, like I'm doing now, and I know I touched on this before with Lewis Carroll, and then we talk about it. And then somehow, because it's been through that process of beautification, because it stood the test of time, we can then say there's something seriously enduring here. There's something seriously wise here, which we need to genuinely take account of and almost pay reverence to in a religious sense. That's my feeling. Like some kind of process like this is going on.
That's a really good breakdown. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I like the second point, embedding the thoughts in art. And I love that point you're making about the beautiful being mysterious.
It is. I mean, like we know in poetry, it's sort of it's possibly rhyme, it's possibly rhythm, meter, although, in Eliot, it's not exactly. There's a certain density, a certain precision in word choice that we don't exactly have when we speak, which puts it into another realm. But yeah, it's still mysterious. Anyway, I don't know. I should mute if I'm going to cough.
It's okay. We have solid ground. Sometimes we have dog barks as part of our sound.
Dog barks are charming though. Me coughing slightly. I don't know. Anyway, I'm pondering this stuff. I'll get rolling, but yeah. All right. So I've given them all slightly silly subtitles, but first one, I've basically tried to pick short ones, or I've tried to extract bits of one of the longer ones. The last one, if I get to it, I couldn't extract anything. You kind of need the whole thing, but I picked some shorter ones, just see how we go with it. But yeah, wires. This is the one. When I was writing the intellectual dark web book, and I keep thinking, I constantly ask myself, what is really going on? University, postmodernism, wokeism, political correctness, whatever you want to call it. I just keep thinking, what's really going on? And people like Douglas Murray, and I suppose Jordan Peterson as well, I think they do pretty well at thinking about this on a deeper level. It's one thing to kind of point out the intellectual foibles of these, movements, phenomena, but it's another thing to sorry, there's a bird outside. There's another thing to try to understand what's the deepest processes which are going on. And so when I ponder it, guess what? Philip Larkin pops into my head in his poem Wires. Yeah. And so actually I almost finished the book, the IDW book, with this poem. I actually ended up finishing it with a quote from Tolstoy, but this came in second last. Tolstoy won by a nose. Yeah. The widest prairies have electric fences. For though old cattle know they must not stray, young steers are always scenting purer water, not here, but anywhere beyond the wires. Leads them to blunder up against the wires, whose muscle-shredding violence gives no quarter. Young steers become old cattle from that day, electric limits to their widest senses. And like when I hear even, I was listening to Eric Weinstein on a podcast just a couple of days ago, and when I hear him talking about the problems in science, again, Wires comes to mind. He talks about how back in the day, maybe in the 50s or something like that, the US had this sense of, the United States had this, this thing that the United States is famous for. It's like, you're smart, you're passionate, you got some ideas, here's a chunk of money, go do something amazing, go for it, go do the very best thing you can. We don't even want to know about it, just go do it, And there's a certain spirit, like the school that I went to, I keep thinking I'm repeating myself, forgive me if I am. The school I went to, you never think about school mottos. Like they're always stupid.
Yeah.
But then I got thinking about my school motto, which was, let your light shine. They used to say it in Latin. It seems so pretentious. Luceat lux vestra. And you'd think, what's that rubbish? And then I realized, no, my God, that's actually the whole point. Let your light shine. And, as a parent, what do you most want from your children? When I think about how to be a father, like what do I most want? I want my children to have passions and to pursue them for all they're worth, for all they're worth, And and then against that, through 20 plus not entirely miserable years, because I've met many, many wonderful students who haven't yet blundered up against the wires. But, for the most part, when I think about what the hell is going on in the university and the wider world, I feel like it's an entire cult of putting wires around the human spirit.
Well, it's a really powerful image. It's such a powerful metaphor.
Yeah. And so this is the true being mixed with the beautiful. And we have such a sense of cattle, before they're domesticated or when they're young, just wanting to
playful,
go wherever.
Exploratory.
Yeah. I mean, my dad lives my dad's place borders a dairy farm, and every now and then the cows get out. And it's kind of an interesting experience. You're kind of like, yes, go,
Yeah.
It's like, they got out and they're off down the road, and you're like, yes, and then the farmer, you go, I got to call the farmer. But, and again, I think of Larkin. And so I whenever I play through my mind all the innumerable bad encounters I've had with academics or indoctrinated students, it's the wires. So why is that? Why do a chunk of humans want to crush the spirit and put wires around things? That's the next question.
Yeah. It's kind of an enduring question.
Yeah. And perhaps it's because you get into a system, and through whatever process, the system slowly corrupts, and people start realizing that rather than doing something genuine, you can kind of fake it. And then once you kind of get a foothold in the system by faking it, then you know what Steve Jobs says? A's hire A's, B's hire C's. So if you're a B and you get a foothold in the system, you're not going to be dealing with A's because they're going to show you for being the B that you are.
Yeah.
And so then you're constantly moving in other B's and C's.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so you then need the wires because it protects you.
Yeah, and that reminds me also of the way that movements start, institutions start. They start out as something that's purpose-driven.
Yeah.
But then in order to maintain themselves, they have to become maintenance-driven.
Yeah.
And so then you're all about the wires.
Yeah. And so it's great that you've said that because I see this in 1,000 forms. Once you start, obviously, once you recognize the pattern, you realize that everyone's, trying to conceptualize this thing in the same way. There's even I've forgotten her name, but there's even a classic writer about terrorism. And it's like one of my favorite articles about terrorism that I used to teach, where she says exactly that too. She says, funnily enough, terrorism's not just about the purpose. They also have organizational goals. So even terrorists whose aim is, mass murder and political overthrow,
wow,
they still get caught up in their own petty little organizational goals.
That's funny. It makes me think of the Life of Brian, the People's Front of Judea and the Judean People's Front. And I think that comedy has a lot of good commentary.
Yeah. So that's the same point too. It's the identical point. Yeah. So this is why things become classics and why we come back to them. So it's so cool, really, that we've just listed between us 5 or 6 different examples of the same thing. But yeah, this particular image, the strange echo of wires in the 4th line and the 5th line. Even the rhyme scheme, sort of, wires, water quarter, stray day, fences, senses. Larkin, even though he's often iambic pentameter. What is it? The widest prairies have electric fences. It's the Shakespearean meter. So he's quite orderly, but he always does interesting things with rhyme, which itself somehow conjures an image. I can't even quite put my finger on it, but I have a sense of getting farther away from yourself, in a sense. There's like a gap opening up, something like that. I could be wrong.
I didn't even notice it right away. That's really interesting.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there are depths. Strange punctuation, the absence of punctuation beyond the wires leads them to why no punctuation there? There's lots of little subtleties and mysteries that like with the best artists, like with most artists, you're like, why that? And it turns out it's just because they're not good artists. But with the very best artists, everything you look at, you ask why that, and it leads you in deeper to something a little more subtle and more profound.
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting. I hadn't heard this one before, so thank you for going into it.
That's wise.
Yeah.
I'm now thinking, how about this actually? It's only now that I realize what the order should have been, as always happens.
Yeah.
Maybe this is a good counterpart to wires. I'm starting to see the through line now. I remember my mum got her hands. I had like collected works of Larkin when I was younger, and it was lying around. And my mum's always been into literature, and yeah, she got her hands on it and was looking through it. And this one really stuck with her. I remember that. Yeah, I spoke to her about it at some length. So it's called As Bad as a Mile, which is a reference to, the saying, a miss is as good as a mile.
I don't know that saying.
A miss is as good as a mile. Okay. So, you go for a shot, like say in sport, and, in soccer.
Okay.
That's actually one great thing about America and Australia. We both say soccer. We don't say football.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
We have different words for everything else, but You know, in soccer, when the ball goes off the woodwork and everyone's like, oh, it was so close, so close.
Uh-huh.
And you're like, but you know, it's still missed.
Uh-huh.
You may as well have, doesn't even matter. You know,
Yeah.
a
Okay,
miss
that
is
makes
as good
sense.
as a mile, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And you
Mm-hmm.
say that in life, oh, I was so close. But it still doesn't matter. You missed.
Yeah.
Anyway, as bad as a mile. Watching the Shide core. You know, when you throw the apple at the bin,
Mm.
that old game. Watching the Shide core, striking the basket, skidding across the floor, shows less and less of luck and more of failure. Spreading back up the arm, earlier and earlier, the unraised hand calm, the apple unbitten in the palm.
Mm.
So brief, so simple, so heavy. So watching the Shide core,
Mm-hmm.
throw it at the bin, striking the basket, skidding across the floor. You hit the basket, but you didn't get it in.
Mm-hmm.
Shows less and less of luck, bad luck, and more. And the way, look at this, the way it jumps from
Mm-hmm.
the first stanza to the second, and the words of failure, bam, hitting in there at the beginning of that second stanza, spreading back up the arm, earlier and earlier, the unraised hand calm, the apple unbitten in the palm. So quite a few of Larkin's poems are about reflecting on life and trying to work out how the hell you got to where you got to. You know, I know in one of the other poems, Dockery and Son, he says, what does he say? Something like, those warp tight shut like doors, they're more a style our lives bring with them. Habit for a while, and then they harden into all we've got. And how we got it looked back on rears like sand clouds. What he's saying is, you know, you can't get back into the past. How did we get to where we got? He says, well, you do something, it becomes habit for a little while. You don't really do it for any great reason. And then it hardens into all we've got. It then becomes the very substance of our life. And yeah, can't really work out how we got to it. So yeah, he deals with that in other poems. But here he's saying it's not, you know, the miss is not bad luck. It's that we are a failure. There is something deficient within us. And you look back at that moment before you bit the apple, before you made the choice that you made, before you threw the apple. And at that point, all things were possible. Success was still possible. You know, so it's looking back, at regret and blaming yourself for what you didn't achieve. And it's so brief, but I also wonder whether it's like one of the most substantial things that we all have to deal with, this unbelievable sense of failure. You know, and just like what I get so excited about Shakespeare, because when I read his sonnets, the character in them, which I kind of assume is him, comes across as so frail, even though he's, you know, the greatest artist to ever live. You think, Larkin, you know, you're one of the most successful poets also to have ever lived, and yet he's haunted by feelings of failure.
It's really, I love the time play in this. How he jumps backwards, and that really poignant sense of regret.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful.
And so, I mean, I don't know. I don't know how you feel, but it's funny how much I myself am always, you know, I'm haunted by feelings of failure. I feel like I'm constantly driven onwards by the need to create more. And, you know, I'm getting older, still just middle-aged, but I have a sense that I have maybe 15 or 20 years of real peak intellectual functioning, maybe longer if I'm lucky. But I feel like I've got to, you know, create for all that I'm worth. I've got to, you know, drive myself as hard as I possibly can to try to do something good and meaningful. And so it's funny, this kind of failure sense. It's like maybe we even need it, or some of us, or I don't know. But yeah, it's like no matter what, I mean, I certainly feel like no matter what I've achieved, it's kind of nothing and there's so much more that needs to be done, so many bigger things. But then you look at the likes of Larkin or Shakespeare, who have these same emotions of these sort of senses of failure, and you realize that it's something of human nature.
Something that runs through all of us.
Which gets us back to wires. What happens if you're not that capable, yet you still have this sort of hunger, this will to power, to use Nietzsche's term, which I think we all have to greater or lesser extents. And you need to make something of yourself. But yeah, you're not particularly capable. What do? You get into an organization, a hierarchy, you then corrupt it. And then all the corrupt B's and C's get to climb the hierarchy together, getting their promotions and their medals and all of that crap, which is ultimately meaningless. I mean, it's these poems, it's what we create that's truly meaningful, or the relationships that we have. That's the truly meaningful stuff. Our children, all of that kind of thing. But because I think people are, cursed with this feeling of failure, they'll take fake success, something like that. That's why I say feeling like reading this one with wires, they conceptually go together in a way.
I can see that. Yeah, that's really profound how it speaks to that yearning and that self-doubt and the potential that's squandered or misused.
And also the movement to the dark side. I mean, this is why I'm such a Star Wars fan. Not all the abominations that came after, but the first couple of movies, the first 2 or 3 movies. Again, I can't remember if I've mentioned it before, but I go back to it. Luke asks Yoda, "Is the dark side stronger?" Yoda immediately says, "No, quicker, easier, more seductive." When you let this feeling of failure, when you let it corrupt you, you go to the dark side, and then you become the one putting the wires up. So it's like, you've kind of got to make a friend of failure. You have to embrace it. You have to hold it to your heart as closely as you can, despite the pain it causes. And if you don't do that, you then go to the dark side.
That's really well said.
Yeah. And this is what we need to talk about at university, because if the system is broken with all of these issues, but you can't touch this stuff. I can't. I mean, you sort of can, but you sort of can't, If I bring these stuff up in lectures, I know I'm going to piss off a handful of students, and they're going to, figure out some kind of complaint or when you do bring these things up, which I've occasionally done with other academics, their eyes just kind of go a little glassy and they just don't say anything. And then they'll get you on a technicality by saying, obviously they'll go, "Oh, Larkin was a conservative white male from Britain."
Yeah.
So that's exactly what you get. So he doesn't count.
Yeah.
He's evil. By identity, he is evil. These are the moves they make. It's remarkable.
Yeah. Invalidating people's works just for identity characteristics.
Yeah. Anyway, this is humanity, huh? This is life. Isn't it funny that this is what we're doing? Oh, look, this one's related as well.
Yeah.
To put one brick upon another. Another brilliant short one. What do I call it? The Hamet Problem. Was it to put? Yeah, this one he moves from. It's not iambic pentameter. It's back to the whatever they call it, tetrameter. Tetrameter. I always have this mental block where I want to say quadrameter because four's like tetra or quad. It's just this anyway. Okay. But yeah, to put one brick upon another, add a third and then a fourth, leaves no time to wonder whether what you do has any worth. But to sit with bricks around you while the winds of heaven bawl, weighing what you should or can do, leaves no doubt of it at all. So yeah, you can go to work and do your work, and you don't think, you don't reflect, and you feel okay because you're just going along with the crowd. You're just being a good citizen. The world tells you you're right. You earn your money. You whatever, follow the fashions. And then if you're slightly philosophically inclined, at some point you start to reflect on what the hell you're doing. And you realize that maybe what you're doing is not actually worthwhile and there's not value in it. And so you start to reflect. But the more you reflect, the more you go into that dark place. Which is why people say the devil will find work for idle hands to do. It's like almost a traditional conservative maxim that you have to get to work so you don't go crazy. And there is something to that. This is like this is the great sort of trade-off. And so you can sit and reflect and you understand the truth perhaps of existence, or the danger is that, nothing has any purpose. Why do anything at all? Or you can act. And then you lack awareness. It's like this crazy sort of trade-off.
It's kind of a polarized perspective. It's one or the other.
Yeah, which I mean, ultimately, I don't think it is. Ultimately, I think that if you do find, I keep thinking of Peterson and the amazing stuff I hear him say, frankly, all the time, where he's like, well, what do you do in life? He says, God damn, you have a romantic adventure. And he's right. You have a romantic adventure. What are the greatest adventures that you can have? The pursuit of truth, the good, the beautiful. I don't know, you make rockets and you try to fly to Mars, or even if you just like hiking in the wilderness, maybe raising a family and trying to create the very best humans that you can create. I don't know, all of that. There's a certain romantic adventure in all of that. So I'm not quite as pessimistic as Larkin. But at the same time, there's still quite a truth in it, that once you then get going and doing something, you can sort of lose track and cease to be able to reflect on the value of what you do. Like I say, it's Hamet's problem, because Hamet should just kill his uncle Claudius, who killed his father. He should just act. But he thinks too much. He's like, I don't know if this action is the right action or not. Whereas maybe stronger people would just act. I don't know. It's not exactly the same point. But anyway, as I talk, I realize
the weighing what you should or can do.
Action in action, But again, things that really should be talked about. When I sit in my staff meetings and all the emails go around and everyone's like, hooray, so-and-so did another good thing. Hooray, someone got another promotion. And I'm just like, all I could do is think of Larkin. I'm just thinking, this is just all meaningless.
Well, it seems to be that in that first stanza, it's the work becomes its own reward.
Yeah. And there is something, there's something to that, but you'd want work and meaning to actually be combined.
Yeah.
And that's what, that's the nature of a healthier society. And this is even why, everyone rips on Marxism, but, there's still something to Marxism. Communism's another matter, but the concept of deracination, the concept of people being alienated from what they produce and, us all being atomized. There's a certain reading of Marxism which very much fits with like more traditional values. Anyway.
That's interesting.
I don't know. Anyway. We're sort of, how are we going? Maybe another 10 minutes?
Yeah. We have time for like one or two more?
All right, let's see. I keep putting off the really bad one about men and women. Maybe I have to save that one. I have to save that for yet another talk, because that's going to go on forever.
That's interesting.
I don't know. I'm a bit nervous as well, though. Like I've been so, this is like the hardest topic to talk about. So
yeah, it is a hard one. But maybe that goes back to the statement you made at the beginning of this conversation. Anything we ought to talk about, we can't.
Yeah. I feel it. I don't know. I still might put it off till next time.
Okay,
because it's too big. It's too epic.
Make it a big long conversation.
A big long one. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll line up some ducks and maybe throw in a few other quotations and do something a bit. Anyway. Okay. This one's really beautiful too. It's called tops. So, spinning tops. So, I don't know. I feel like everyone sooner or later plays with spinning tops, like however you wind them up or pull the string, and then, they go off spinning around the floor. And at first they kind of are a bit shaky right after you've started them spinning. And then they go into that crazy still space where they just kind of sit there hovering. Yeah. And then they start to go, and then they fall over. It's a 3-stage process, which maybe no one ever thinks about much at all. Although, like my kids play with tops. I don't know how they get into the house, but sooner or later, maybe
they're in the Christmas stocking.
The Christmas stocking, maybe, McDonald's gives one out or something like that. I don't know. Not that I take my kids to McDonald's, maybe once or twice because they begged. But yeah, so there's this image of tops, and then Larkin takes it, and it's like, this is your life. Tops heel and yaw, sent newly spinning, squirm round the floor at the beginning, then draw gravely up like candle flames till they are soundless asleep, moving yet still. So they run on until with a falter, a flicker soon gone, the pace starts to alter. Healing again, as if hopelessly tired, they wobble, and then the poise we admired reels, clatters, and sprawls, pathetically over. And what most appalls is that first tiny shiver, that stumble whereby we know beyond doubt they have almost run out and are starting to die.
Wow.
Yeah, like the entirety of life encapsulated in the metaphor of a top. It's almost like Dr. Seuss, I feel.
Yeah. I love the rhyme scheme.
Yeah. See, I'm such a rhyme fan. Like all through my 20s when I used to write poetry a bit. I mean, I still write poetry a bit, but who the hell doesn't write poetry, right? But rhyme and meter was just so frowned upon. And I sort of would do it. I'd be like a closet rhymer, and yeah. I don't even care. It's just like, that's what I do. I do rhyme and meter. I don't care. Yeah. But yeah, I'm like, but Larkin does it. He's good.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah. So yeah, just to go over it a bit, pick out a few key bits. And they do all relate. Tops heel and yaw, sent newly spinning, squirm round the floor at the beginning. This first phase in life is not just childhood, but I think also youth, perhaps our 20s. Certainly these days, as people have, people's youth goes well into their 20s or 30s or 40s even. And maybe some people never even grow up, which, look at me, back to Jordan Peterson again. Men becoming man boys staying as man boys their whole life, or I don't know, or the women I know as well, still just bouncing from one bad relationship to another with the man boys. Here we go. I'm starting to get talking about it. It's a prelude.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love this word squirm. It's this one tiny word choice just seems to just describe the sort of restlessness, but also like amorality of existence, perhaps in youth and maybe our 20s. This sense of restlessness, we go through our life, like whatever, people take drugs, they party, whatever, have a series of bad atomized relationships with people that they don't care about and that don't care about them. Squirm. It's this sort of restless uneasiness. It really stays with me. you know, that, when I think of as I get older and older and so much more fire and brimstone and, concerned about morality and family values and all of that, I like it because it's like, youth, it's not exactly evil or dark. It's just this sort of agencyless energy. You can't control it. It's just this compulsion would be the word.
Okay.
That's youth. And then it flips. And this isn't much better either. Then draw gravely up like candle flames. A candle flame when there's no wind. Remarkably still. And that's like the top when it's spinning. It just has that crazy still quality. They are soundless, asleep, moving yet still. We go back to put one brick upon another.
Yeah.
People then enter adulthood. They've been squirming through their 20s. They then settle down, have a family, go to work. And every day is just the same.
It's
wake
the
up,
wires.
go to work. Wake up, go to work. Wake up. It's the wires. Wake up, go to work. Wake up, go to work.
Moving yet still.
Moving yet still. That's just, life carries on like that for often 20, 30, 40 years. And so it's not much better either. Soundless, asleep, like you're sort of also kind of unconscious in this trance. So in your youth, you lack a kind of morality. There's a compulsion. In this period, there's also a kind of, and when I say, I don't mean lack of morality, I mean kind of amorality. You're not like a proper thinking person. And then, and so they run on until with a falter, a flicker soon gone, their pace starts to alter. And then the shake happens, and he describes when it clatters. And of course, that's when we get old and we die from cancer or we lose our minds. And it's interesting, he says, he pauses and he goes back to that in the last quarter of the poem. He draws attention to, he says, what most appalls is that first tiny shiver. Like my mother has dementia, and I've been trying to, I can't remember if I've mentioned it before, but I've been trying to keep her going for years now. And it's just, I mean, I don't know, pick the disease you want your parents to die from. I don't know.
I thought of dementia when I read that, when you read it. Yeah. I thought of that first little sign that there's something
first
slipping.
Little sign. And I was in denial about it for some time, even though there were signs, because, I'm an only child, my mum's single. So basically it's on me.
Yeah.
And so this is part of the growing up process as well, is realizing, this one's on you. And, this is a big digression, but
it's a lot of responsibility and a lot of emotional responsibility as well as physical responsibility.
Yeah. So I didn't fully own it for some time. But yeah, I look back and I think, what was the moment I really knew? And it was like sort of about 3 years before the wheels actually really fell off.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I won't go into it, but it was quite a, remarkable day, and, remarkable things happened on it. So in my own life, it's quite powerful. But yeah, I recall Mum struggling to make sense of distances. And then I talked to her about it later, and she said, she was hallucinating that day, and she said something to me, this was the first time I truly knew that heaven was real. But she was having like a dementia-related hallucination. Yeah, I'm oversharing, but hey.
No. That's, and it must be, I also thought about that from the perspective of the individual who is seeing their life go in this way.
Yeah.
Like when, I know it's terrifying for some people, and they can be in a lot of denial about those kind of memory slips and cognitive declines.
There's a period when you start to lose it, but you're still capable of grasping what's happening to you.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's the glory of tops.
Yeah. Wow.
But just 3 stages. That's life. Restless youth, mindless work, and then the decline.
He's, when you said that he was he had trouble in relationships, and there seems like a real sadness in his life
Yeah.
that he's
Immense.
reflecting through these poems. I mean, there's
Yeah.
like this very dreary pessimism
Yeah.
and pain that he's witnessing.
Yeah. And it's funny then that, not funny, but yeah, absolutely. But then it's interesting that as that quotation from earlier on, like anyone who then, not anyone, but so many people who then read him, they still, they can't help but think about him constantly, as do I. And I mean, I am more optimistic, you know. I'm still a romantic. I believe in, you know, as I often joke, the power of love, you know. I believe in that there is good work. I believe that, you know, reaching towards eternity, whether that be through, you know, bringing up children well, trying to live a moral life, trying to create beautiful, enduring art. You know, I believe in the value of all of that. But then, I mean, there's still something uplifting in all of this too, looking at the truth, reflecting on it, reflecting on the darker lessons in it, and trying to think, well, I don't know if I want to be that. You know, by looking at the truth, as hard as it is, it's only by doing that as well that, even if we only do it intuitively, that surely we kind of need to do that to then be better people, I feel. Maybe.
Well, it's a dark reflection, but it does ring. I can see how this could resonate with so many people. This imagery,
Yeah.
So heavily relatable metaphorically. Yeah.
Maybe I'll just squeeze in one more little one, which is this ever so slightly uplifting ending.
Okay.
Ever so slightly. Hang on a second.
Church going.
Yeah. So Larkin's an atheist.
Okay.
I guess he's an atheist. He seems like an atheist. I probably could know his biography more, but I'm not the kind of, I mean, I'm not even really a scholar, even though I'm a scholar. I'm not the kind of person who like goes into things in just immense detail. I prefer to just like grab as much of the good stuff as I can, imbibe it, and then move on to the next one. So, you know, I could know more about him. Let me just, so church going, atheist, cycling. The early parts of the poem describe how he's out cycling, and from time to time he stops in churches. I don't know if this still happens. I don't know if it's like this in America, but you know, you could go to a church and the door is open. It's unlocked and there's no one in there. And you go inside and it's empty. Have you ever had that experience?
I have not. I haven't tried to go into an empty church. I bet they would be locked though.
These days.
Yeah.
But there was a time, and maybe it's still like this in parts of the world, maybe in, I don't know, Florence or something. Maybe it is Venice. I'm just thinking about places I've been to where you kind of just drift in and wander around and have kind of a deep experience. I've seen that in
cathedrals. I've visited cathedrals and they're always open when I've, you know, it seems like they are, but in just a regular little church, I don't know.
Yeah. So this was certainly something that used to happen. And I find this poem immensely profound and moving. Being, I guess, an atheist myself who's, I don't know, Christian adjacent, that's for sure, you know, but it's not like God's called to me, even though I ponder it often, though, you know, the values work for me. The old cultural Christian, as they say. But yeah, so anyway, this is Larkin reflecting on this experience of being an atheist and going into a church. And so I extracted the last bit. I wonder who will be the last. He's reflecting on the decline of religion.
Okay.
You know, because he's believing the decline of religion is inevitable. It's far from clear that's the case now, but certainly you can imagine in like whenever this was written, I should know, 50s, 60s, whatever. He says, I wonder who will be the last, the very last to seek this place for what it was. One of the crew that tap and jot and know what rude lofts were. So he's like, who's going to be the last person who comes to this church and finds it vaguely meaningful? Will it be academic type scholars, tap and jot, some ruin bibber randy for an antique, you know, someone trying to loot something? or Christmas addict counting on a whiff of gown and bands and organ pipes and myrrh? You know, will it be someone who was into Christmas and heard that churches had something to do with Christmas back in the day? Or will he be my representative, bored, uninformed, knowing the ghostly silt dispersed, yet tending to this cross of ground? So will it be someone like me who knows nothing about anything much, but who somehow feels drawn to this place? So yeah, dispersed yet tending to this cross of ground through suburb scrub, because it held unspilt so long and equably what since is found only in separation, marriage and birth and death and thoughts of these, for which was built this special shell. So powerful. You know, the events which are just so important in our lives, like the central events, you know, obviously birth, marriage, death, you know, the stuff that Shakespeare writes his sonnets about. They were once all held together with reverence in this religious place, sanctified. And now we only know these things in separation in our atomized world. He says, for though I've no idea what this accoutred frowsty barn is worth, it pleases me to stand in silence here. A serious house on serious earth it is, in whose blent air all our compulsions meet, are recognized and robed as destinies. That's the line which always is in my mind. All our compulsions meet, are recognized and robed as destinies. This is an atheist, and I'm kind of like this. I believe, you know, humans are animals and we have compulsions, you know, whatever. We have our instincts. But the church sanctifies these. And even though it's not exactly in the poem, the church, in sanctifying it, it kind of also moralizes it and gives us a better way and a worse way of dealing with our compulsions, which, getting back to the man and woman thing, we have destroyed this in the last 50, 60 years with the sexual revolution. You know, atomized pleasure is just fine. It doesn't matter how you treat people. Yet, you know, the church on a good day has a very different perspective about that, trying to tie these things together, sanctify them, try to give us some kind of moral backbone. And he says, yeah, and that much never can be obsolete, since someone will forever be surprising a hunger in himself to be more serious, and gravitating with it to this ground, which he once heard was proper to grow wise in, if only that so many dead lie round. So yeah, as much as we live in this world of just pleasures and laughs and entertainment and consumption, there is still something in us which hungers for something more serious, which seeks wisdom, you know, a more purposeful life, morality. And we've destroyed so much of that inclination by, you know, destroying religion, by, you know, relativizing morality, as has happened in the last 60 or 70 years, of which postmodernism is just one incarnation of it. And so, yes, this amazing sense of loss as well, that if only that so many dead lie round. It's like, well, it kind of had it once, but then everyone died. And it's this beautiful image of he's in the church reflecting on this, and it just zooms out a little bit because every church is surrounded by a graveyard. And all the people in the graveyard were the people who once populated the church and had their compulsions recognized and robed as destinies. But yeah, now, yeah, the graveyard, you have this sense of the graveyard's now in weeds and overgrown. People are forgetting what any of this was for. And yet we don't forget, do we? I often say, like, we might think that we're done with morality, but is morality done with us? It's the same kind of point. There's still something in us that we can't totally push away, that something more serious, something deeper, something more eternal. So ever so slightly uplifting finish.
Yeah, it's interesting how he's quite cynical about the people who might be, you know, hypothetically coming to this church or to this kind of place. He's got the different categories of people, like the tap and jot, like this is the soulless academic, right? The knowledge base, but without any kind of reverence. And then the ruin bibber for the antique, that's this kind of mercenary, just out for get a buck or get some cool collectible, and then
sell it on eBay.
Sell it on eBay, yeah. And then the Christmas addict is this shallow commercial sort of just all about the facade and the image.
Instagram. Hey, I'm at a church.
That's right. Yeah, it's the influencer taking a picture in front of it.
Yep.
And then his representative, he says bored and uninformed, but then he goes on to offer this really profound reverence for what this symbolizes. And so I just find it interesting that underneath of his sort of shallow categories is something a lot bigger and more substantial, especially under the one he would put himself in.
Because the thing is that he's putting himself down, but there is still something in him, which is why, I mean, you were saying before, you know, Larkin it's unbelievably bleak, it's unbelievably sad, and yet there is, and even he as a person, I think, failed. It came out after his death that he was, you know, with several women at once, using them, which is really pretty tragic given what he's writing about in his poems. And so, you know, he's kind of being cancelled in a sense.
Yeah.
And yet, and yet there is still something in him. There is, as much as he's failed, he still recognizes the truth and the good, which does come through in this one, which then becomes uplifting.
Yeah, it's all very tinged with sadness, but I see the uplift. It's subtle.
Just
subtle.
Well, there's still something in us. And insofar as we remember, we have still some sense of what the purpose of religion was, maybe, or still is for some, you know, and there is still something deeper and valuable in that.
It's that line there about surprising a hunger to be more serious.
Yeah.
That's really beautiful. This is so cool. I really enjoy these lessons. It's like I'm getting a little literature lesson, and I really enjoyed it. I hope people will watch this and enjoy it too, and just
hopefully
just sit with it.
Get a few.
Yeah,
I appreciate it, because, you know, if I retire from academia, I'm an absolute compulsive, I guess, teacher.
Well,
like it's just
cool.
So it's. Again, I'm so immensely grateful that you give me the opportunity to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited to do it. I loved studying literature when I was in college and at university, and it's the amount of substance and depth in writings from times before the time we're in gives us a window into this enduring human spirit and tradition. And I think it's who's the guy who said, who's the author of the quote, "The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there." Do you know that quote? That's one of my favorites.
But I can't remember.
Yeah, I don't remember either. But I love that, because it's they're opening up your eyes to the traditions of people that came before. Both gives you a perspective that life hasn't always been exactly as it is, and there are other ways to be, but at the same time it gives you this sense of connection, because there is a common thread always to the ways that we encounter our reality and our humanness and our relationships. And so I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I feel like there are deeper samenesses and superficial differences for the most part. I mean, maybe that's my prejudice, but yeah, even when I study classic works from around the world from 2,000 years ago, they seem for their quirk, despite their quirkiness, they seem more familiar than strange to me.
Well, maybe next time we talk, I can get you to talk with me about the sexual revolution. Maybe you can queue up a couple of
queue up some heavy
documents
quotes
if you want, and we can get into a bigger, just dive into that meaty chunk that you are wanting to save for a longer conversation.
Yeah, which I keep getting a bit shy of talking about.
Yeah, well, perhaps it'll present itself next time.
Sure.
It's really great to see you again, Jamie. And thanks for this
you too. Thanks.
Larkin lesson.
No worries.
All right.